Today, we're diving into a true masterclass in leadership from one of history's most important figures, the first Caliph, Abu Bakr. We're going to look at how he combined brilliant military strategy with this deep spiritual wisdom to guide his commanders through what looked like an impossible campaign. Let's break down exactly how he did it.
So, picture this. The year is 634. The brand new Muslim state centered in Medina has its sights set on Syria. But, this wasn't just any piece of land. This was the heartland of the Eastern Roman or Byzantine Empire. We're talking about a military and cultural superpower that had run the region for centuries. The challenge they were facing was, well, immense.
Right out of the gate, the Muslim armies hit a wall. Their initial push into Syria just completely stalls, and this creates a really dangerous stalemate. And the reason for this stalemate was pretty simple: the raw power of the Byzantine military machine. They had way more soldiers, they had elite cavalry, and a whole network of heavily fortified cities like Antioch and Homs. I mean, these guys were dug in, they were experienced, and they were a formidable force.
You can just feel the tension building in this message, right? This is from the commander on the ground, Abu Ubaidah, writing back to the Caliph. The Byzantine emperor himself, Heraclius, was personally overseeing the whole operation from Antioch, pulling in the full strength of his kingdom. So yeah, the threat was getting bigger by the day. So how does a leader who's hundreds of miles away in Medina even begin to respond to a crisis like this? Well, his answer was the first pillar of his strategy, a tactic that was both incredibly practical and, as we'll see, deeply spiritual.
Abu Bakr's first move was just a brilliant tactical call. He told his commanders to enter Syria using different routes. What does that do? It stops the Byzantines from being able to focus all their power on one single front. It forced them to split their attention, and honestly, it created a whole lot of strategic confusion. It was just a really shrewd, practical plan to deal with a very clear danger.
Now, this tactic is a perfect example of a core Islamic principle called asbab. It basically means taking all the necessary, practical, worldly steps you need to take to achieve your goal. It's the human part of the equation, the planning, the preparation, and the execution of a good strategy. But here's where it gets really interesting. This military strategy didn't just come out of nowhere. Abu Bakr was actually following the Quranic example of the prophet Yaqub, that's Jacob, who, as it says in Surah Yusuf, gave this exact advice to his sons. He took a practical step, the asbab, but he knew that the final outcome wasn't up to him.
And this brings us to the other side of the coin, tawakkul. This is the idea of having complete trust and reliance on God's plan after you have done everything in your power. It's the spiritual follow-through to all your worldly efforts.
And this balance was a central teaching of the Prophet Muhammad, peace and blessings be upon him. It's perfectly captured in this famous saying: tie your camel, that means do your part, take the practical steps, and then trust in God. It's action and faith working hand in hand. Okay, so a brilliant strategy is one thing, but what about the soldier who's actually on the ground, facing exhaustion, thirst, and just the sheer terror of battle? How do you keep morale up when the odds are stacked so high against you?
To really understand this, let's zoom in on the story of a young commander, Hâshim ibn Utbah. He was sent with reinforcements, and the march itself was an unbelievable hardship. I mean, it was a true test of physical and spiritual endurance for him and all of his men.
And this is where we see Abu Bakr's counsel to this young leader. It's amazing. He completely reframes the whole experience of suffering. He tells them that every single moment of struggle, every step they take, every bit of hunger or thirst they feel is being recorded by God as a righteous deed. He even quotes directly from Surah At-Tawbah that Allah does not waste the reward of the doers of good.
Now, this advice comes straight from the prophetic teaching that no hardship you endure for a higher purpose is ever wasted. Every trial, right down to the prick of a thorn, is seen as a kind of transaction with the divine. It's an opportunity to be elevated spiritually. Hardship, in this way of seeing the world, it almost becomes a form of currency.
So these two pillars, worldly strategy on one hand and spiritual resilience on the other, were the absolute core of Abu Bakr's leadership, and he made sure to communicate them directly to his commanders to really steel their resolve against the enemy. He basically laid out this fundamental contrast. On one side, you've got all the material advantages of the Byzantines, huge numbers, fortified cities, imperial power. And on the other side, the source of Muslim strength was something internal. It was faith, it was resilience, and a totally different way of thinking. I mean, this quote from Abu Bakr's letter is just so stark. He tells his commanders that they're leading an army that doesn't fear the one thing the enemy treasures most. Their motivation wasn't about this life, but about the reward they hoped for in the next, and that created a massive psychological advantage.
And just to really hammer the point home, he reminded them of their own recent history. He brought up the early days with the Prophet when they won victories not with big armies or fancy equipment, but with pure conviction. He was basically telling them, hey, our real strength has never been in the things we can count. So after looking at this critical moment in history, what are the big takeaways? What can we learn from Abu Bakr's leadership? Well, we can really distill his whole method down into this 3-step model. First, you have to have a clear-eyed look at the situation on the ground. Second, you make a practical, worldly plan, the asbab, that's also tied to deeper principles. And third, you have to be able to inspire and motivate people through a deep spiritual conviction. So the crucial point here is this powerful synthesis. For Abu Bakr, leadership wasn't a choice between being a tough-as-nails strategist or a man of faith. No. Effective leadership was the seamless blending of both. You tie your camel and you trust in God. And that really leaves us with a final thought, one that applies way beyond the battlefield. In our own big projects, whether it's in business, in our communities, or just in our personal lives, this piece of history kind of pushes us to ask ourselves, are we treating our practical plans and our deepest beliefs as two separate things, or are we treating them as two essential parts of a single powerful whole?